more I play Helldivers, I just want to make it very clear that like I enjoy Helldivers. You know, I think it's still very fun even with all the controversies and issues. In a group of 3 or 4, when you just want to hang out with the boys, I think the game is still very fun. Yeah, I think the game could still be very fun with a group of friends, especially when you're just messing around, having fun, having a good time in the night after work. You know, having fun just shooting mobs, shooting Terminids, robots, Illuminates. You know, it's very good for that. I think as a group of friends, it's still very fun. Um, you know, I think the balance issue just doesn't make any sense because I don't know why they're very adamant about balancing a PvE game. You know, I never understood the notion of using analytics. I like the idea. I mean, the thing is, from what I understand, they don't. I might be mincing word, making up stuff here, but if I recall, they said something along the lines of like they didn't want like one weapon, or like specific weapons, like taking over everyone, so to speak. Oh, I didn't know that. I didn't know that's how it works. You know, I understand that notion, but the thing is, in any game, there's always gonna be some kind of meta. No matter how hard you try to avoid, there's always gonna be certain weapons, loadouts, etc., stratagems that will just bring better value, you know? And then there are players, and sometimes the majority of players that like playing kits of value, you know? Everybody wants the most bang for their buck. I should drop that. You know, and I feel like they shouldn't be afraid of certain weapons being a niche, you know? It's like how Arc Thrower. This. I don't think like Arc Thrower is not gonna be used everywhere. I tried many times. Yeah, I tried many of times to use Arc Thrower and stuff outside Terminids, but like you know, people have their own flares. Some people like playing like for Terminids. Some people like playing gas. Some people like playing. Some people like playing fire. Some people like just playing like bullets. Sorry, guys, out here. Yeah, you know, and everybody's each to their own. Each to their own. Everybody could play a game however they want. But what I just didn't like was the initial balance. I mean, honestly, the current balance is still kind of janky. You know, especially those stealth nerfs, and stealth buffs for the enemies. Those type of stuff are very annoying to deal with, and they add up. It's not just like one time they did. They've been doing that for a long time, and you don't really necessarily have a reason for it. You know, I felt like what should have happened was, 'cause I remember when the game first came out, my friend was telling me about this, that they were looking at analytics, like player usage stats, to determine what weapons need to be nerfed or be adjusted based on like the use rates. In theory, I thought the idea was pretty cool. I thought it was pretty good. I like the idea of using data collection for game for like for loadouts to kind of figure out okay maybe certain weapons need to be tweaked, you know, based on the use rates. However, I did not expect them to use it in that way because I think what happened was Arrowhead or whoever was in charge of that collected the data, looked at the data, and just kind of made decisions based on that. When they didn't really ask the big question of why the data was showing that. I think the biggest issue that was apparent was that. Actually, I'll go this way. They had the data. They knew what people were using. But they didn't even know the why. Okay, and I think knowing the why is very important in terms of balance because just kind of looking at the data and blindly tweaking stuff based on what people are using. And I think the biggest issue was the fact that their decision was to use that as a justification to nerf stuff. Now, I'm not saying that the game should nerf stuff, but in a PvE game, when there's really no PvP, I'd say you don't really need to nerf things unless it is very apparently, you know, where it's just like you try many different alternatives and it still hasn't like brought its use rate down. You know, to take like what was it, the Breaker Spray and Pray, the Birdshot one, the one with the drum mag. I remember for Terminus, but my friend was he said, "Man, this gun is really good. The drum mag. I mean, obviously, like it does a little bit less damage, but you get so much ammo, and against the little bugs, it does its job." Arrowhead saw that people were using that over the other Punisher. What was it? Like the round reload one, right? And what they did, they decided to do was, hey, let's just nerf the spray and pray. Let's reduce the drum mag to regular mag. That will force people to use the other one, right? Because too many people, they believe, are using the spray and pray. And I'm not saying they can't do that. I don't have the answers to balance, but I felt like they should have looked at the other options first. And the other option is figure out, okay, why are people using the spray and pray? In Terminids, at least, you know? Because they would have found that. Oh, they would have found that, they could have asked why. They could test it themselves, and then eventually, if they don't really know, if they don't really want to test it, they could just ask, okay, hey community, we noticed that a large number of the community are using the spray and pray over the regular Punisher. Uh, we were thinking about tweaking either weapon, but we would like to, ask the community for their input on it and reasons to, the pros and cons of which. That way they can kind of build a clearer picture of why that weapon was being used more. And this is just my opinion. I did not do any research, but for me, I would go towards the Breaker Spray and Pray for Terminids at least, solely because it has a higher bullet in the mag count. It's not a round reload, and it does its job to clear the small ads perfectly. It does its job in clearing like the medium tier enemies. Obviously, it's not gonna do great against like the the medium ones, but against the small bugs, you can kind of spray in the horde and you can kind of thin it out for the most part. That's good enough in most cases. And why would I use that when I had to deal with the round reload, the slower reload? What do we got? Ooh. Yeah, like why would I use that over that one? It's just because for me personally, I just prefer having the mag reload, drum mag, and then there's nothing wrong with that. You know, there is nothing wrong with that. Oh, roots. I don't think there was anything wrong with that. I felt like, but at least if they understood like why the community preferred that one, they could at least kind of make a calculated adjustment, you know. But what they did was that okay, they just saw the data and they decided okay, we'll act upon the data by itself, and what they decided to do was nerf the Breaker Spray Prey, remove his max size. I'm not saying that was a bad choice, because honestly, that it probably would have eventually led to that. To be honest, I felt like eventually it would have led to that decision in the end, anyways. But I think it would have been nice to kind of involve the community in that kind of decision, because what they could have done was like, hey, if people, the reason why people aren't using it is because they don't like the round reload. That's what's going on. What if we increase the just the reload speed on it, or maybe up the armor pen on the Punisher, or up the damage? That way, it kind of entices people. Hey, I want to do more damage, or the faster reload speed does make it feel a little bit nicer, that I would take its medium armor pen over the Breaker Spray and Pray. That would have been a logical way, but obviously in hindsight it's 2020, you know. Now a lot of what I'm gonna say is like things that, well, clearly we already been through it, so we already kind of know what happened and why it happened. But that doesn't mean that we can't learn from it, you know. So what I'm saying is that they shouldn't be too quick onto nerfing things. If they do want to adjust some things to bring things more in line in terms of use rate, they could ask the community what their opinion is, and then the community will tell you, well, we use both weapons, and we believe that this is the reason. We just don't like it. Like the other shotgun doesn't bring enough value compared to the spray and pray for XYZ reasons. And once they do that, they could buff nerf accordingly. And I'm a firm advocate that they should have been a. Oh, oh no. Oh no. Oh no. Oh no, that's bad. That's very bad. Okay, that wasn't the way. Um, I felt like it should have just been like a nerf should have been the last resort for one weapon, because logically, because I think what happens is they got the data, they didn't know why, and they also didn't play their game enough to kind of make those decisions. When they should have realized that the reason why one weapon was being picked over the other options is because that weapon was just better overall. So to bring the other weapons in line, they had to have buffed the weaker versions, because there's a reason why players gravitate towards that. There's a reason why players would rather use certain weapons more, certain playstyle. I mean, obviously, you're gonna get those people that like that weapon no matter what. That's just how it is. And the first step to, like their first instinct was to nerf what was doing good, and not on top of that, they're not just nerfing those, like the top performing weapons. They also decided to buff enemies. They made like enemy patrols stronger, or they adjusted enemies, added more patrols, added whatever, like they always do, sometimes without telling anyone. And then the day now you move the option that people prefer, and now you give people the weaker options, and that makes people angry. You know, I felt like what should have happened was they should have just said, you know what, let's just buff what's underperforming. So like the Punisher, yeah, reload speed, damage, or armor pen. That way, it makes it more appealing to go to that weapon. You know, and what happens is you're not cutting off the top. You're not cutting off options. You're creating options. You know, because what happens when you nerf the main weapon? You're literally removing the option. You're removing a viable option. You're making that viable option less viable. And now you have to choose another less viable option to perhaps do better, you know? You're removing a viable option rather than creating options, you know? I think that's the main takeaway, you know? Like, same thing for the, what was it, I mean, I think Railgun was a little bit too overpowered on release. It kind of like one tap charger on like the heads. I think maybe with Battalions. I can't remember it too well, but at least chargers, full charge. But I think it was also fair just because oh gosh dang it. Because if you consider how the way the Railgun works, it's one of those high risk, high rewards type of stuff. I think it's a fair. Oh, come back. I think it's a fair I think it's a fair trade-off because you could easily just have the weapon blow up on you if you max charge it and then it blows up on you and you're gone and the weapon is gone. I think it's a fair trade-off for something like that, you know? I think it's fine. But, you know, obviously maybe for battle tie-ins, you know, maybe it should have one-shot them. Maybe chargers. But the thing is, you know, if they were kind of worried that, hey, the railgun is like too much people are using the railgun over like the recoilless or the expendable anti-tank. I felt like what they should have done is ask the community. Like I said, same deal. Ask the community. Why are they using the railgun over the recoilless? And if, in my opinion, in that case, and I still advocate for this case, is that I didn't like I didn't like the recoilless, and I still don't. Just because the reload mechanic, I didn't like the idea of being stationary to reload it. I mean, it's not the end of the world. Now, I guess automatons, for example, you could easily just find cover and then just reload it like that. You know, I mean, you know, but for me, I like to be mobile. I don't like to stand still. I don't like to, especially in tournaments, I don't like to stand still for too long, which is why I would gravitate towards expendable more as well. But there's a reason why I'm not sure if that was a general consensus, but there will be a consensus for players. You know, players will have a reason why they're using certain weapons more. And Arrowhead should have considered like why people were using it. And I still do, you know. But their option, well, I mean, like I said, the railgun nerf was impending, but now I feel like the railgun is just not that like appealing anymore. I can't find myself running railgun often anymore. I just don't really see the purpose of it quite so much anymore after the nerf. Even at max charge, I feel like it doesn't really do too much. I'd rather bring an expendable anti-tank or epoch. Though I am more of an epoch boy. But that's the thing, they acted without knowing the full story. They knew half the story, but they didn't really know the other half, and they were making judgment calls without knowing the full story, which is a very poor decision, as it clearly turned out. You know, and I felt like they should have realized that the balance should, in my opinion, should have just been a buff basis, and if they really had no other option, nerf it. You know, because what happens when you just nerf instead of buffing accordingly? What you're doing is you're just cutting off options for people. People are running those specific weapons because it's makes the game more enjoyable. And when the game is enjoyable, people keep playing. You play a game because you want to have fun. You want to have a good time. You don't want to be frustrated. You don't want to sweat. You don't want to try hard. I think Helldivers 2 is just a game where you come back home from work, you sit down, you spend a couple games in there evening with your pals, and you play the game a bit. You play, you go kill some Terminator, you go do some horde shooter. Oh, I want to go do stealth. Oh, I go fight some automatons, or I want to, play with rockets. I want to play against robots. I want to play against Illuminates. That's what it is. You want to have fun. I think that's what the goal should have been, is to have fun. If your game is fun, the game will sell itself. If it is not fun, people will not play. You will not make any money. But clearly, when the game came out, it was fun. There was just something about the game itself and the way it played and the story, the whole concept. It was just very fun. People enjoyed it. I enjoyed it. Many people enjoyed it. It was so popular, and it is so sad to watch it to watch it turn out the way it did. That's the sad part. That's the real sad part, because they really caught lightning in the bottle with it, but they just keep making these decisions that just, for lack of better word, it just feels very idiotic. I'm not saying they're idiots. They had a winning thing, but I'm saying the decisions they made for it just didn't make sense, and it was very idiotic. And these decisions eventually piled up until it culminated to the recent, like, May, March, the April, May, you know, mass downvote. Not downvote, but you get what I'm saying. And they still lack the understanding of why people acted that way. And you get the general people, oh, we are listening, we understand why you guys are frustrated. But it's been a culmination of things, in my opinion. And the balance was just one of them. And well, oh no! Alright, I guess goodbye. Ooh. Ugh. You know, I feel like they don't know how good they had it, and they keep making decisions that are very idiotic, very, like, out of touch. And then they seem to be, oh no, I can't believe I triggered that. Oh gosh, is this gonna work? They just keep making these idiotic decisions that clearly isn't working and very out of touch with the community, what the community wants. And I understand that balance is not easy. Balance is very difficult. But when the community is like yelling that, hey, certain weapons just don't feel fun, or what, or, why did you guys do this? You need an answer. And it just can't be, well, because the data shows it. Well, did you know why it was doing like that? Have you played a game to, like, a certain extent? Ooh. That's the biggest issue here for me. Oh god, there's a beetle. You know, that's the biggest issue for me, was that it just felt like they just weren't getting it. You know, and my general rule about it is that, the first time it's okay, it happens. Second time, okay, it's a coincidence, but You know, you got it now. Third time, okay. Third time, you should. My thing is the third time the heck happened. Yeah, the third time is like, well, clearly, you got it now, right? And the fourth time, it's clearly on purpose. You know, you get three strikes, and then the fourth time, that's it. You know. What the hell? I never. Huh. Hmm. Interesting. Dang it. Oh, please. Okay, nice. Yeah, I just think the decision to do it was just bad. Well, like I said, hindsight is 2020. Oh, okay. I did not know it would do that. Oh, that's unfortunate. Please. Oh gosh. Yeah, I don't know. The whole analytic thing was just, I think on paper it was smart, but I don't think it was the right decision in the end, because they got the data, but they didn't really know the why. Like when they were comparing the Punisher shotgun and what was it, the spray and pray, they didn't really understand the full story. They didn't understand why people were choosing one or the other. They just thought, hey, we saw people were using that one more, we gotta nerf that one. When they should have asked, if they didn't know the why, if they didn't bother looking for the why, they could ask the community. The community would have told them why. Maybe it was because of the round reload wasn't that fun. Or there's just so much more value, and they could explain what the values are. And what they should have done with that information was, okay, let's buff the other one, like the weaker one. That way it brings the play rate. in line with the other one, the one that's being popular. You know, because what ends up happening is that they end up creating. What ends up happening is that they end up creating options, more options. Because what happens when they nerf the number one weapon or like the popular weapon, they're removing options when they should have been creating more options. You know, I feel like that should have been the initial take, but like I said, hindsight is 2020. You know, but just because it happened in the past doesn't mean that they can't fix it. You know, they can at least learn from it and say, okay, maybe we don't do that. Maybe when we balance stuff, we should probably try focusing on a buff basis. You know, and if the analytics are telling us one thing, and if we can ask the why. If we can't really figure out why or understand why, we could ask the community. The community will oblige and tell them why. And once you have that, you could say, okay, now we know what we could do to make it more appealing, make the other options more appealing. Now let's make the round reload Punisher the reload speed a little bit faster. You know, just increase the reload speed just like maybe a couple seconds quicker. That way, you know, you open up that option. And if it's still that blatant, you can always just keep modifying until you know you see a change. And if it takes more than three uptime, like three buffs, and then you might need to nerf the other option. But my main gripe is that what they end up doing was they end up removing alternatives instead of creating alternatives. I'm not sure if that's what they meant to do, but they should have realized that you should create alternatives for the player rather than remove alternatives, because that doesn't make any sense. That's how you make people unhappy. And when you do that, you also don't secretly go, we're gonna buff the enemies as well. Sometimes telling the players, sometimes not telling the players. We'll find out. They'll find out that when they're doing the data mine. You know, that's the absurd part. You know, I feel like the balance system should just been a buff basis with nerfs being used very rarely. Because what ends up happening is, yeah, you move the options from the player rather than create options, and players will like the options. You know, because and also I think they needed to understand that certain loadouts will just appeal to certain factions more. Like your Terminator loadout is gonna be different from your Automaton. You know, like for Terminators, I enjoyed being Electro Boy. I wasn't the Fire Boy or the Bullet Boy. I was a guy running Arc Door, Arc Armor, Tesla Tower, Sentry Turrets. You know, that was me. I just like that kit. You know, but if you look into the analytics, you'll see that Arc Door isn't using automatons or luminates because it just doesn't perform as well over there. But it doesn't have to perform well everywhere. That's the absurd thing, you know. Because, and the sad part is that I think they discontinued that method of balancing. I don't think they do it anymore because I think they found out that it wasn't working. But like I said, it wasn't working because they didn't know the why behind it. Because they found out that it wasn't quite working, so they eventually discontinued that methodology. But honestly, I think it's fine. I think that methodology is fine. They just needed the full information and get the community involvement and that type of stuff because the community will tell them exactly why they aren't using it. But they didn't want to, you know. And you can bring the argument for the same thing for the what was it the whole why they balancing a PvE game in favor of the enemy. It just doesn't make any sense, and it still doesn't. I don't know why. I understand that some people might say it's not challenging, But still, the game should be fun. You know, at the end of the day, you play a game to be fun. You know, I don't play a game because I hate myself. You know, looks like League of Legends, looks like Rainbow Six. I'm joking, but but I mean, except for the League of Legends part. Like for me, I used to play the game a lot. Whoa, I used to play that game quite a bit, but I stopped because the game wasn't fun anymore. I found myself not enjoying the game, and I stopped. Oopsies. So I'm like checking my phone. And that was a big issue about it. That's my issue with it was that. Oopsies. Come on. That's how I feel like. I feel like the decision there should have been to do that. Create options rather than remove options. Is that gonna work? Oh! Oh gosh, that's bad. I didn't think it was gonna be that bad. That's unfortunate. I think that was the biggest issue. And they just still don't get it. I guess I'll do this. I didn't want to do this, but... Oh, that was bad. That was a bad idea. I did one too many. There you go. Nice. I only say it because I really enjoyed the game. I really wanted it to succeed. But it was almost as if they were like purposely doing it at times. Oh, that was green. It felt like they were purposely doing it at times. Like, I know they don't, maybe they're not intentionally doing it, but at times it felt like it. But, I felt like small buffs would be just making it nicer. I remember when they buffed the de-escalator. Because I remember when I unlocked the de-escalator, I was like, why would I run this over the arc door? Or the other grenade launcher. I never needed something to do both. I mean, I guess it's nice to have the option, but for me, I couldn't really understand the need to have both. Ow. Okay, that was bad. But when they just increased the reload speed on it, it felt much nicer. I admit, I enjoyed it. When I tried it after the buff, I was like, you know what? It feels pretty good. I like it. I like it now. Obviously, it has its own drawbacks too. But that little buff, that little buff to me was very good. It actually made it where I started running it for Terminids at least over the Arctor at times. Where I decided, no, I don't want to use Arctor. I'll play Electro, but I want to play with the de-escalator this round. And I think that's what it should be. thought I heard something. You know, because at the end of the day, what gets people to play your game is that it's fun. You know, that's what gets people to play your game and keep playing your game because the gameplay is fun. Oh gosh. Because if the game isn't fun, nobody would be playing it. It's just that simple. And Helldivers was fun. People loved it. I loved it. I still do, despite some of the terrible decisions that they made. Oh gosh. But like I said, it feels like every decision they make, they just are completely out of touch. Ooh. No, that's not what I want. And I hope that they eventually figure it out, 'cause I do wish the best for the game. But would I recommend it to other people? No, I wouldn't. I told a lot of my friends originally that, hey, you shouldn't get this game. Like, my dad said, like, I see you play a lot. And I said, no, because there's so many issues, especially balance. Like, my biggest gripe was the nerfing. Like I said, I think buff should have been the way. Buff the other options. Buff or rework the other options to make it more appealing than the popular one. That's what it should have been. Not nerf the other one. Not nerf the top boy. And also make a decision to also buff the enemy factions as well. Or their favorite thing, the monkey paw balance of, hey, yeah, we buffed the thing that you wanted. We buffed one thing, but we also buffed the enemy completely. So now it made that weapon a little bit better at the cost of everything else. That's been a very common balance thing. I've grown to highly dislike it. Oh no. Oh, thank goodness. You did. You know, and they don't need weapons to overperform one another. Let's do this. Let me. Actually, no. I think if I drop. I think lollipop is that. You know, I say you should always just create more options rather than take away options. That's what I firmly believe in. I still do. But obviously, like I said, hindsight is 2020. It's just upsetting. And honestly, a lot of like the coyote, for example, I think they changed like, oh no, they changed the way a mechanic worked, the fire mechanic, and now it nerfed the coyote in by accident. But I'm not sure if it was meant to be caught in a crossfire, but clearly they didn't do anything to fix the coyote. So, and they've been very hesitant to revert it because I feel like I honestly I think their ego is a little bit too big to admit that, hey, we done something that the community didn't like. You know, like when these happen, it doesn't make the game unplayable, but it's these little things that keep happening where they buff one thing, but then oh gosh, why did it happen? Okay, that's dude. You know, when something like that keeps happening, it just gets frustrating for the player. You know, and if the game frustrates them too much, people will just stop playing the game. Because why would I play a game that frustrates me? You know, that's just how it is. Oh gosh, that was pretty clutch. Whoa. You know, because at the end of the day, if the game isn't fun, nobody be playing it. And clearly the game was very fun, but it's just that they keep making these idiotic decisions that just keep adding up and up and up, and eventually the community had enough. Oh gosh, please. Oof. Oh god, no. Okay, please. Oh gosh, the game almost screwed me there. I don't even know where I could go from here. Okay, he doesn't come up. Yeah. Oh! Okay, you know what? Forget about that. There you go. Oh gosh, I chose poorly! Okay. Ugh. You know. Unless you're Artosis who gets mad at StarCraft Brood War. Oh! Hey, like, can my character, like, stop pouncing like that? You know? And oh yeah. Hold on. It's it's such a shame. It's just a total shame. Every time I see it, I just can't help but say, what a shame. Nom, nom, nom. Actually, you It's just very upsetting. Because the whole monkey paw stuff is just very ridiculous. I hate having one step forward, two steps back every update. So everything else just falls behind as well. Like I never understood the sentiment. Like I just had a hard time understanding why that was their decision to keep balance of the game against the enemies as well. You know, like like the shield guard, the shield bug. Granted, I never really had an issue with them. You know, ow, gosh, I need to get out of here. Yeah, like I never had an issue with them pre or post update. Honestly, like I was in the boat of gameplay wise at least, it didn't really matter to me because for bugs, that was during the phase when I unlocked the double-edged sickle, and I was running the inflammable armor, and I was also running the vitality perk, so I was just using double-edged sickle. So that update didn't really bother me too much. However, I agree with the sentiment. Honestly, I did enjoy that it made them, though they did have heavier armor on the armor bits, the weak points, you could kill them pretty quick. Like if you would go in around them and just hit their weak points, they died much quicker, which I enjoyed. I thoroughly enjoyed. But for me, the only reason why they reverted was because the community outrage. Because if the community didn't do that, they would have not cared. But the thing is, what I don't understand on it, on the developer side, was why they decided to do it. I've I never heard anybody say that those shield guys were too easy. Look at that. Okay, I was gonna say that thing coming towards me. Yeah, I never heard anybody said that shield guards were too easy and they wish that they were more difficult to play against by increasing its armor. I never heard that sentiment. Then again, I don't actively follow that stuff. I tend to avoid that stuff. Frankly, I don't really care to a degree. But yeah, I never heard that. But on a lore standpoint, though, not lore, but like in terms of the universe, it just didn't make sense for that guy's armor bits or high armor than our Bastion tank, our heavy tank that we spend 10 minutes to call down at a time. How is that bug that's a fairly common enemy have higher armor than our freaking heavy tank? That doesn't make any sense. And it increased the durable damage to boot. So it didn't really make any sense. There was really no reason for them to do it. They didn't have a reason. They just did it because they wanted to. You know? And if they still want to introduce that idea, they could put a community poll out there, kind of gauge the community reception on it, say, hey, we still want to implement this. Should we create just a new enemy variant, like a bigger shielder that's less common, but it does that. It's just bigger, it has more HP and bigger shield, but it does that. It doesn't charge you like the other ones. And the community can take their pick on it, and they can workshop it. And then that's the whole point of beta test too. Have a beta test to test that mob out. Same thing with like the weapon balance. You know, it seems like they're in cahoots. I'm not saying they are, but it makes it sound like it makes it feel like they're in cahoots to make the game more difficult for some reason. Because the players barely gets any buffs, and when we do get buffs, it comes with a host of other issues, other enemy buffs, or other weapon nerfs for no reason. Like, yeah, yay, here, fine. You want that to be buffed so bad? Here you go. Here's a buff. But here, we're also gonna buff the enemies. globally, and we're also gonna nerf these other things that will nerf that weapon as well. You happy now? That's been the general sentiment of it. And it becomes very frustrating to deal with that every time. And a lot of players have grown past their limits, and rightfully so. You know, it just seems like the priorities, especially for balance, just seems to be in the wrong place. It doesn't have the player's interests at heart. And if you don't have the player's interests at heart, how can you keep your player base? You know. And I do want to say balance isn't easy. You know, I understand. I tried balancing some other stuff before, and like, man, is it not fun? Uh, change one thing, you change 20 other things. So I was very scared about to 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 do that type of stuff. But if you don't know, that's the point of the beta test. You know, that's the sole point of the beta test. But I don't know why it took this long for him to try and implement something like that. But even then, I think they're gonna mess it up somehow. They're always gonna find a way to mess it up, sadly. You know. Wow. I do think, however, you know, for balance at this point moving forward, I think they should just stop the nerfs. Quit it with the nerfs and just focus on buffs. Buff what people are saying that it's not fun. Like people have been complaining about that Halo shotgun for the longest time. That especially when that Strength shotgun came out. Like that, like how, why is that one? And people argue it's power creep. You can argue it is, but I just think it's just negligence from Arrowhead's point of view. And also, I think it's just because they need to make money somehow, right? Yeah, because if they release an underpowered weapon, no one's gonna buy it, so they're not gonna make any money. So they have to release a weapon that tops the others. But then that contradicts the whole idea that we don't want there to be like a meta, so to speak. Like, yeah, we don't want it to be their meta, but when we do release weapons, we do try and make them a little bit overtuned. That way, people will be incentivized to buy it. That way, people might be incentivized to spend money for them, thus making them a profit. Only for them to be nerfed at some point later, instead of buffing the other weapons. You know, and weapon buffs don't have to be that insane. They don't have to like make them like incredibly strong. I'm getting cooked. It could just be something as simple as you know, reducing the reload time, like what they did at the escalator, because that honestly made me want to run it as a viable option over the Arc Thrower. And I do use it here and there. I do say, you know, I'm not gonna use Arc Thrower this time. I'm gonna go de-escalator this run. And I change it adds a little bit of variety to my playstyle at times. And I think that's what it should be. And obviously everybody's gonna have different opinions because people play differently. Everybody plays the game differently. I'm not saying I'm the best player. I'm not saying any of that. In fact, I would say I'm far below the average player because I will make questionable decisions just for the heck of it. I'll probably be fine here, right? No. You know, and it's hard to listen to everybody's opinion. Like I know that a lot of people want different things. You know, people want new content. Some people, you know, because people had different play styles. I just think that they should just not continue the nerfing way. They should probably like fix the Koyo, cause that's been the biggest. I don't use it personally myself. I have it. I just don't use it. I rather use double-edged sickle. That's just my preference. But I say they could probably revert that, get that thing back in line, cause that's been the biggest complaint, and then they could just go into looking at analytics again, but just focus on the buffs. They should just focus on weapon buffs. See what's not being used and try to figure out why. Involve the community into why, and then buff it accordingly. That way you create more options rather than remove options. I think that's the key takeaway for the balance. Balance should not, especially in a PvE game, shouldn't be removing options by nerfing the primary popular weapon, but instead creating options by buffing what's not being used. That's not gonna work. I get squeezed through there. You know? Gosh dang it. Oh no. Yeah, and that's what really frustrates me for the balance. I think they should just hold all, fix what the community is currently doing, and once you kind of get to that play state, you could just adjust by buffing what's not being used. Like the Halo shotgun, maybe they could rework it, in an alternative buff by saying, okay, well, what we'll do is we'll increase the armor pen on it. And if they don't want to do that, they say, hey, let's reduce the ammo and the magazine size, but we'll increase the armor pen and damage. But we'll also add this new mechanic where the pellets, the buckshot, will go through enemies. So you have a little bit more crowd control. You can shoot in the horde and those pellets will go through one or two enemies and hit the one behind them. Which will incentivize other people to give that one a try. You had a beta test and you could have people test it out and compare the shotgun and say, yeah, I think it feels good. Or, oh, maybe that's too strong. Maybe instead of penetration two enemies, make it do one. Stuff like that. That was way too close. Like I said, create options rather than remove options. That's the key takeaway for the balance, in my opinion. But would they do that? I don't think so. Yeah. Because they're too busy on focusing on creating new content despite all the recent backlash. My other frustration is, what was it? The general PR. We are listening. We're listening, guys. We're listening real hard. Are you now? Are you really? Because people have been complaining about this for years, months, and then it takes a review bomb for the developers to send out a PR notice to try to like calm the flames. Like, come on, man. Like, you just make complaints for months, and people finally had enough. I think one of the most common one was like, could you guys like stop creating new content and just focus on fixing the game that's been people have been complaining about for months, and be transparent. Oops, I don't want that. What was it? What was it? The May one. Let me see here. Because what really grinds my gears is when they say we're listening and they're clearly not listening. What was it? Transmission from Super Earth's command. When the question was, what was it? Like they don't like answering questions. I don't know why they would not like to answer questions, especially when like people have been complaining about it. What was it? Yeah, the one like during May, beginning of May, was like the question was in multiple updates. there have been hidden changes to weapons or enemies. Why were they not announced in the patch notes? And their response was, we want our patch notes to be as clear as and complete as possible to the level of detail that matters to our players. In some cases, some changes have not been communicated with the clarity we intend, and we are continuing to improve our internal process so that patch notes more accurately reflect gameplay adjustments. We are also working on how we explain balance patches more clearly, especially when change can affect across multiple weapons, enemies, or gameplay items. Did anybody see anything wrong with that answer? Well, the biggest problem is that that didn't answer the question at all. The question was why? Why were they not announced in the patch notes? Why did people have to data mine it to figure out that the charger had its speed increased for no reason without being told to anyone? Ow. You know, that was the question, was the why. We wanted to know why. Why? And they did not answer why. I don't know who came up with that answer, but they did not answer why. Not anything in that answer answered the question why. It was what and how they were gonna do it, but it didn't answer the question of why. Because I believe they don't have an answer for it. We. I think they actually don't have an answer for why they've been doing that. Why they've been secretly nerfing, buffing things that goes against the players without our knowledge. They don't have an answer why. Yeah, I'm not insinuating that they're purposely doing it to go against a player, but hear me out. When they have a history of doing stuff like that, you can't help but think that. You remember the fire tornadoes? I remember there was a patch note where they said that, oh, we updated the fire tornadoes because they had a tendency to follow players around. So you're telling me that those flame tornadoes were purposely like coded to follow the player around? You're telling me like that was a feature? Oh, goodness me. Yeah, so you're telling me that this entire time they intentionally programmed those tornadoes to purposely follow the player around, and you cannot say otherwise. Because if it wasn't coded like that, why was it? Why was it? Why did they need to do a patch like that? If that was not their intention, why was it already coded like that? Why did they have to send a follow-up patch to address that issue? You know, like what? Come on, man. It just feels like they'll purposely add things or do things that will go against the player's interest because they just feel like it. They felt like, hey, let's make the players a little bit more annoyed, so let's just add this and maybe change it later if people notice it. You know, it's been a history of that, and the general, like, oh guys, we are listening to you. You know, Super Earth High Command is listening to you, but when in the responses to that big old review bomb riot, they didn't even answer the main question. One of the biggest question was, yeah, why were they hiding these like balance changes? And they couldn't even answer that question. They couldn't answer that. They couldn't even answer why they did it. They just pretended that it didn't exist. And that's what's brilliant. That's the frustration that keeps adding up every time that stuff happens. And how could they be listening? How could you be listening and then just completely not answer a question? It's very ironic. to be saying, yeah, we're listening, guys. We're listening to what you guys are saying. And I do want to make it clear that I know that like those community PR guys, community managers, they get a lot of flake because they're the middleman between the community and the developers. So like I understand that like you know those community managers are just relaying those opinions to the developers. The community manager has no say in what the balance or what the developers do with that information. But the concept we are listening. You know, we are listening to the feedback and we are planning to do better. You go do that so many times before people are just fed up completely. And I think it's gone to the point where everybody's been fed up. Myself being included. You know. It's not just that too, like the communication and and what was it, the acknowledgement of the player base outside of review bombing. It just feels like it's non-existent. You know, and stuff like that. Like even the recent one, like the June was it June 4th? What was it? I think it was good for them to review a roadmap. You know, I think it's nice for them to be transparent to that degree to kind of just tell us what they want to do, what they plan to do, and whatnot. I think it's fine. Oops. But I think the kicker is, what was it? Don't mind taking that. Ooh, nice. Let me do this. You know, what was it? It's just hard to like the qual like you know like the whole concept that you know fix what you have instead of trying to adding more things because when they add more things, it seems to be more issues that come up. The Dreamforce roadmap announcement, what was it? And coming a bit further down the line, we're tackling stratagem bouncing. We assembled a task force to prototype fixes for this issue, and we are hoping to have it solved by the end of the year. And hell pod steering, similar to stratagem bouncing, we are also tackling this long-standing issue. Improving enemy and player traversal, which makes environmental collision and reducing movement penalties on grass and vegetation. Why does it take so long for these to be put into the pipeline of work? Why must it take a community outrage for them to suddenly consider looking into these issues? Is my question. I believe the stratagem bouncing and the hell pod steering has been an issue for months, if not a year at least by now. My question is, why did it take a review bomb for them to finally acknowledge said issue? And even then, they say they're gonna try to tackle it by the end of the year. I mean, I'm glad they are tackling it, but why did it take so long for them to do it? Why does it take so long for them to fix a lot of quality of life stuff that annoys a lot of players, like stratagem bouncing? Nobody likes to see the stratagem bounce when it shouldn't. There are certain terrain where we know that it will generally bounce, and you avoid those terrain. But there are times where you chuck a stratagem, and you're like, oh, I'm gonna throw it here. Whoa. But the game was like saying, nah, that's not that. It's gonna bounce. It bounces and then you miss your stratagem, your sentry. It doesn't matter what it is, but it ends up not going where you want it. Though not like run ending, it's mildly frustrating. Compiled with some of the other issues like the hellpod steering, enemies clipping through buildings and walls for some reason. All these minor frustrations add up. Mild, minor frustrations add up, and people aren't happy. The game's not fun anymore because it gets this is more annoying to play again. That's not gonna work. You know? Why does it take so long for that to be these to be addressed or even acknowledged? I mean, they've been acknowledged for years now, but they just haven't like said anything about fixing them. They're too busy making war bonds. Well, why are making war bonds and new weapons and new enemies and new stuff like that priority when these things are very frustrating? Like the Hellbomb steering too. When you're playing that like high defense, high value asset defense mission, it's very common where someone gets eliminated and you try to throw him back down. I'm just gonna actually let me just do this. Yeah. You know, that one was like the most egregious one for the Hellpod steering. Because what ends up happening is if you die for whatever reason, and then your teammate throws you, oh, throws you into the center of the thingamabob of the base, the game at times will be like, oh yeah, I know you threw him into the center of the base, but we know what we're gonna do. We're gonna summon him outside the base, and not only summon him out there, he cannot steer out. Or he's gonna have a hard time steering into the center of the base because the steering is broken for some reason, even with the steering assist ship module upgrade. And then he'll land into the outside of the base where a bunch of enemies are spawning, and most likely he'll die again. And then you repeat the cycle. You try to respawn him again, only to have a chance of the same thing happening again, where he will spawn on the outside, he cannot steer back in, and that'll be the end of him. And it just becomes increasingly frustrating. Oh gosh. That's not gonna work, is it? Oh wait, that's oh wow, that's very helpful, isn't it? Okay. There you go. You know, and then it seems like anything that might buff the Helldiver, because what was it? That exploit where people found out that if you use a jump pack, you could launch yourself on a jump pack, but then your character could like initiate the stationary reloads. So like if you're like the medium machine gun where you have to stand still to reload it. Oh gosh. Oh no. Oh, this is bad. Ooh. Ooh, ah. You know, like you can initiate the jump pack, you will fly, and then you can reload it. You can reload it while you're in the animation of flying. So by the time you come back down, you'll be able to reload your weapon while moving, essentially. That got patched immediately. That was patched so quickly. But then the strategy bounds, the hell pod steering, that stuff hasn't been fixed for eons. And the enemies clipping through the map, that hasn't been fixed at all. Why is there anything that could even remotely benefit the player not be looked at for a year, months, but like something like that gets fixed immediately? Hmm. Oh gosh. And that's what's very frustrating. You know, and you don't have an answer for it. And I don't think they ever will. Because I think they prioritize their resources into creating quote unquote new content, meaning war bonds, because the war bonds is their way of making money. And don't I don't think they're in the wrong to do so because they need to make money. They're a studio, they have jobs, that's their job. But like I said, that's their job to fix these things, to add these things. And it seems that their priority has shifted to just making war bonds, making new weapons, making new content in a way to make money, keep making money, instead of preserving and fixing some of the existing issues. And suddenly now, after all the outrage, they decided that hey, now's the time for us to prioritize some of these a bit, which is quite sad that it has to get to that point before they even decide to act. Ow. No, no. You know, like, well, why does it have to be, why does it have to be taken to that point before it can finally be acted upon? You know, that's the frustrating part. And then you get the general, oh yes, we're listening, oh yes, we're listening. You know, it's just very frustrating. It's just very frustrating, and that's why people are angry because this frustration has been culminating for the past few years, months. Yeah, like I'm not a developer. You know, it can be very difficult to fix these things for all I know. Oh gosh, guy. Yeah. But why does it take so long for them to do it? I hope they do it. I hope the best. But right now, they lost all trust from me at least. I hope they could execute it, but you know, I'm kind of pessimistic about it. But I'm just kind of tired of it. You know, I'm sure I'm not the only one. Hmm. Again, I think I can make that. It's just upsetting. These long-standing issues been an issue for so long, and why does it take a community outrage for them to finally decide that hey, we need to prioritize some resources to come fix it? It doesn't make any sense, you know. Companies just too focused on trying to make war bonds to make money rather than actually fix the issues. Okay, that's not gonna work. That would be amazing if that somehow worked. So what was it? Balance, non-existent communication. Oh gosh, how am I gonna? You know, I mean, I'm glad it's still like reaching out and stuff, but at the end of the day, I think they need to do more than just text at this point. It seems like every time they add new stuff, there just seems to be more problems. Like when like the spore bugs came out, they were exciting, don't get me wrong, but apparently, allegedly, they were bugged. They were moving much faster than they should have been. And allegedly, the oxygenator passive applied to all enemies on the map, apparently. I don't know if that was true, I never tested it myself. But that's what I heard, which is kind of silly. How does that get through QA testing? Do they even have QA testing? You know, a lot of these things add up. You know, every time they add new stuff, it's exciting, but it also becomes riddled with issues, like the DLLS stuff. It seems that some people have some issues. I didn't have any issues because I don't use DLLS. I don't care about that. But I saw some of the screenshots. It's just very sad. It's just very frustrating to see and watch it unfold every time. Every time something new comes out, it's cool, but it doesn't quite. But it also comes with its own issues. The monkey paw is one step forward, two steps back. You know, just so much just PR. Yeah, we're listening, we're listening. Doesn't feel like it, and that's very annoying to everyone. But for me, I don't know. We just have to wait and see. I'm surprised I managed to do it during this in one take. You know, like the charger buff, they just need a reason. They don't need to hide it. You know, this is me giving them the benefit of the doubt. I think it might have been a case of when they released the oxygenated passive, they were worried that people will outrun the charger. You know, maybe maybe at that speed when you stim with the infusion and whatnot, that gives you a speed boost and everything. They were worried that people with the oxygenated light armor and stuff, they'll be able to just outrun the charger charging at them. That might have been their reason. Who's to know? They didn't say it. So that's entirely up to them. But I don't know. That'll be it. Peace.